Jeremy, your book, The Modern Middle East, fascinating book. I mean, everyone who wants to know about the Middle East should go and read this. You've been pretty much everywhere in the Middle East. You've been shot at, stabbed, chased, harried, everything. You've been at the sharp end of it. I want to start with Ukraine, because Ukraine is an appalling war. On the face of it, it's a ruthless dictator invading a sovereign democratic country. When I was in Ukraine, and I'm not trying to compare our war correspondent credentials, given I spent 3 days as one, but it was fascinating to me that there were some Ukrainians who said that they felt that Russian-speaking parts of Ukraine, like the Crimea, perhaps even the Donbas, actually a lot of people there wanted to go back to being part of Russia. Does that make it more complicated or not?
It is complicated, and it's not a simple story. And Zelensky himself was not that popular before the invasion. He had 30% approval ratings back in December. And then he brought the country together with, those extraordinary broadcasts that he was doing on a nightly basis, walking around Kiev with his bodyguards and recording things and putting them online. No, I've spent quite a bit of time in the East, in Donbas, this region, where there's been an awful lot of fighting. And I spoke to people there who had no time for Zelensky particularly, who wanted it all to be over. I had found others who weren't sad about the Russians coming in. But then there were plenty of others. It's a bit of a false distinction to say that just because Ukrainians are native Russian speakers, they might automatically feel that they are closer to Russia. Zelensky's first language is Russian.
Right.
And so it's like, think about the Irish. They speak English, but there aren't all that many Irish who want to be part of Britain.
Do you fear that we are nearer a nuclear conflict than we've ever been?
Yes. Probably since the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was when I was a small baby. I think we do. Ever since the very start of all this, Putin has been using nuclear rhetoric. He hasn't done anything, but I think his rhetoric almost normalizes the presence of that threat. I mean, those of us who can remember 1989 and the fall of the Berlin Wall and the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991 can remember growing up. I mean, I grew up in the Cold War, and always in the background there was this sense that if things did go wrong internationally, we might all end up as radioactive dust.
Yeah. Right.
And sadly, I feel that's come back. And that's one of the really dangerous things about this crisis, the fact that Russia, which actually has more nuclear warheads than the US, is talking about using them. Of course, it could just be threats, it could just be talk. But when someone who has an arsenal of, 6,000 plus warheads starts talking like that, well, you've got to take it seriously.